Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. It's been nearly 7 weeks since a fire ripped through London's Grenfell Tower, killing dozens and injuring many more. Today, we ask what's being done to ensure tragedies like this don't happen again. Today, only the charred shell of London's Grenfell Tower still stands. The fire killed some 80 people and injured dozens more. Those who survived were left homeless. Cladding on the exterior of the building and its insulation are believed to have contributed to the magnitude of the blaze. And now there's word that other tower blocks with that same cladding have failed fire safety tests. So what's being done to ensure these tragedies don't happen again? When joining from London to discuss that, we have Thomasina Hessel. She lived on the Grenfell estate near the tower and had to evacuate following the fire. Melvyn Akins, a community activist who grew up near Grenfell Tower. Pilgrim Tucker, a community organizer who fights against housing injustice. And Fergus O'Sullivan, he's a journalist and contributing writer at the Atlantic City Lab, focusing on housing, infrastructure, and urban policy. Welcome to the stream, everyone. I want to start with a comment from a member of our online community. Kevin George is his name, and he's been taking Grenfell residents and their kids on football tours as a way to give them a psychological and emotional break from the stress of the fire. And here's what he's observed.
I would say they need a secure roof over their head until they actually get a new home, so they don't have to be worrying about where they're going to be from 1 week to the next. So some support in terms of activities for their children. So instead of relying on local charities, just something so they don't have to worry about that. Basically, they should be in as much comfort as possible until this whole process is over. What they don't need is, having to fight for justice, which is a bit crazy.
Thomasina, you were nodding as he was saying that. Are you living in as much comfort as possible?
Well, I'm not doing too bad, to be honest, but I just see so many of my neighbours that are struggling. They're still not sure of, there are no written policies as to what funding is available for us, or we don't know how long we're going to be in a hotel. So we know, for example, in my case, I'm in the hotel until the 1st of September. But after that, I don't know. Am I going to be moved to temporary accommodation? Am I going to be staying in a hotel? Will I be transferred to a new hotel? So there's all these different concerns, and you just can't sit at ease, constantly in anxiety and unrest.
And it's not just you, of course. You're there with your toddler.
My son, yes, he's 3, and actually this has been worse for the children. There's this thing called some sort of trauma that comes after the fact, so being in the environment, and that's had a really terrible impact on not only the children of the tower and the immediate estate, but the wider community, the entire community. All the children are suffering from this, and it's really tough.
Now, Melvyn, you're nodding your head there. I want to pull up this this headline that we saw. This is from The Independent, and other sources have it as well. But at least 20 suicide attempts after Grenfell Tower fire, faith leader claims. Melvyn, you've been in the area for 30 years. Do you think that this is, as we heard in the video comment earlier, a fight that residents are having to fight for their justice, and on top of that, then having to deal with mental health and psychological issues that wouldn't be there before the fire?
Yes, I think it is a fight, mainly because the information has not been forthcoming in terms of how it's provided to the survivors and the evacuated residents, but also in terms of what happens next and what the immediate plans are for the future. All of those factors are just things that people do not know enough about and aren't being given enough information on.
Pilgrim, what would you add to that?
I think it's more than just people being given the correct information, although what Melvyn says is completely true. I think what's gone on for a long, long time in that borough and in that estate is that residents have never been given adequate information, and they have never been listened to. Had they been listened to years ago, this situation would not be here, and it's really unfortunate. We're hoping the council can learn from some of their historical mistakes, and I really hope they do, but so far it doesn't look as though they have done, really.
Fergus, do you think that they have learned from historical mistakes?
Well, the evidence so far from their attitude towards the tenants suggests to me that they haven't really learned from those mistakes. I mean, I think the knock-on effect of this tragedy may be so great that it actually forces some change in the way that Kensington and Chelsea do business with their tenants as a borough, but also hopefully across London, where the situation with public housing and its maintenance and its allocation has been really quite atrocious for decades, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is a much broader issue as well. This is a nationwide issue. You know, the managed declines of the estates, it's a real thing. They're trying to clear poor people out of London, and this is just becoming more and more apparent now, and it's got to stop. And you know, this is such an extreme situation that now we have an opportunity here to actually make sure we're heard. And I think we do have to take some personal responsibility in this and actually start speaking up and engaging, because a lot of it was, in my opinion anyway, I think a lot of us were going through willful ignorance, just allowing these things to happen, you know, because on a personal level you think, okay, yes, I'm aware of this now, but what can I do about it as a mere individual? But recognizing that the community is coming together, we have an opportunity to really stand strong and to actually make a difference, not only for this borough, the Kensington and Chelsea borough, but for the entire country. It's really important that we do this.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I think half of the trouble is that warnings were sent to the authorities, were sent to the Kensington and Chelsea TMO, who are the tenant management landlord for Grenfell Tower. Warnings were sent to the controlling council, which is Kensington and Chelsea, and those warnings were ignored quite flatly. There were basically warnings about gas piping, about the cladding, about the electrical wiring, and all of those concerns basically amounted to fears of fire, basically, and they just were completely ignored. And here we are as a result of a fire, and it's completely destroyed the building. Now, I've grown up on that estate, and I have also seen fires in that building, in Grenfell Tower specifically, and there was one as recently as 2010 on the 9th floor, and that fire was contained. Now, the renovation works took place in 2013, and the fire regulations and the evacuation procedures were not updated. And here we are in 2017 with the fire taking place with new materials on the outside, and it has absolutely turned itself into a death trap. And, you know, it cannot be in 2017 that we have over 80 people dead. And you know, if this had been a building full of, I don't know, 125 leaseholders, or potentially a different class or social quality of people, we wouldn't have this outcome. And I just don't think that we can live in a world, or we should accept that we're in a world where we can have potentially one outcome for one type of people and another outcome for another type of people.
Right. So the government has, of course, we all know this by now, but they've launched an inquiry, and the consultation period for that inquiry is scheduled to end this week, Friday, August 4th. And we reached out to those in charge, and they declined to be on today's show, but they sent us this statement. The inquiry is independent and impartial and committed to finding out what happened in the fire, what its causes were, and what lessons can be learned to prevent such a tragedy happening again. Our community is not so sure. This is a tweet we got from Grenfell Legal. Hi, the general feedback that people are giving us is that there is mistrust in the process. We'll have to wait and see, but they go on to say, we should add that people have told the inquiry team that they want a diverse panel of advisors and not just a chair, and that's a judge who is heading this up. Earlier, Thomasina, you mentioned that this is an opportunity. Pilgrim, I'm wondering if you also see this as an opportunity for residents to finally make their voices heard, especially knowing that you were an advocate for residents before the fire.
Yes, I think, well, residents will have to, they are doing, and they will have to make the most of this opportunity. I'm sure people in many positions of power won't want to hear what many of the residents have to say, but it's very, very important that this inquiry is thorough, and that the full concerns of residents and all of those historical problems and the bigger policy causes of these, not just mismanagement and incompetence within that council, but the broader policy trends that led to this being even possible. The fact, you know, on the one hand, on the practical regulatory side, that there is barely any regulation. You know, regulations have been cut so much, and then enforcement, the possibility of enforcing building regulations are very, very difficult, and fire safety regulations, because we've had such, you know, huge cuts to our public services. And then on the other hand, and this is something that's going right across London and many cities in the southeast of England, is this trend to have very powerful private developers come in and go into contracts with local governments to either do maintenance work or upgrading work, or very often whole regenerations and rebuilding of estates. And you know, the fact that residents were ignored in this instance isn't dissimilar to what's happening in the rest of London, where these regenerations are going on and residents are just simply not being heard. And the end result of those regenerations is
and regenerations, I just want for our audience,
social homes left.
In some places it's called regeneration, in other places it might be referred to as gentrification. But Fergus, you're nodding your head there as Pilgrim was talking. What are you thinking?
Yes, I mean, because Pilgrim's got it absolutely bang on. I think what people outside of Britain may not realise is that places like Grenfell are under extremely intense pressure in a fight for urban space. Simply, London's population is growing. There isn't enough space to... it's very complicated to build new housing. We have a green belt surrounding the city, which is not possible to be built on. There is strong resistance in the suburbs that are lower density. So often places like Grenfell, what we call estates, what Americans might call housing projects, are picked as kind of the path of least resistance. They're built on public land, and they are therefore often chosen by councils that subcontract to private developers to what's called regeneration. What it really means is often either redoing the insides of buildings. It happened in Grenfell, not when the cladding was put on. They also had extra apartments put in the empty spaces. In many cases, it means simply knocking down a housing project and rebuilding it. But then when it's rebuilt, instead of being entirely social housing, it's a mixture of private housing, social housing, and affordable housing. Moreover, that process of going from the old building to the new building is typically one in which many social housing tenants are displaced, get a raw deal, or end up with housing that's actually worse than what they've had in the past. So this whole Grenfell is something that many people have been worried about for some years, and that's why it's so agonizing. As so many people that have been following this have read, Grenfell residents themselves were complaining quite articulately and vocally about these problems. But in a situation where there is such a hunger for extra development space, those people were not treated with, their voices were not listened to because they were not sufficiently empowered by people who have power.
Right.
And it's also not just about space, it's also about land value. One of the things that a lot of people are probably aware of is that the land value in London has shot up astronomically. So Grenfell Tower and Lancaster West Estate is in an area of London referred to as North Kensington. It's probably well known for where the Notting Hill Carnival takes place, and it's an area in the 1950s and 60s that was heavily populated by the Caribbean community, the Irish community, and other ethnicities from around the world. And this was an area considered as undesirable in those times, and nobody wanted to live here, or so people thought. Since then, the area has become a vibrant cultural centre. It's known far and wide for what it offers. We've got the Portobello Road. It's obviously known for the area, or known for the film Notting Hill that was filmed in the area, and all of these things have contributed to the land value going up really high. And as a result, there is nowhere to build. And yes, it is a fight for space, but what they are trying to do is claim back the land that was typically given to people when it wasn't wanted. So yeah, it's a fight about land value as well.
You know, and Melvyn, you mentioned it being a vibrant neighborhood. what I'm sensing from people who are tweeting us online is they're saying, yes, it is a vibrant neighborhood, and so that means we want the people who represent that neighborhood, our council members, to accurately represent our wishes and needs just as much as those who may have a little bit more money. So this is a tweet we got from Celeste. She says, many feel the council should be run by external commissioners while the investigation that we mentioned, that inquiry, is ongoing. This would allow residents to feel more confident in getting the help they need and in moving forward with this inquiry. Thomasina, do you feel like your council members represent you accurately?
Well, no, because at the end of the day, they're from a different background to us, you know, and I think whether it's their fault or not, you know, as far as rich people go anyway, you wouldn't expect them necessarily to understand what poor people go through or people with restricted resources. But I think if you are elected as a councillor, it is your responsibility, whether you're from that background or not, to engage and learn about the needs of your community so that you can actually deliver the service, because you're actually a civil servant. And I think the failure, in my view at least, of the councillors to actually make that effort. Elizabeth Campbell is the new elected Conservative councillor for Kensington and Chelsea, and she's been elected since 2001, I think, if I've got the figures right. And she's admitted that she hasn't even stepped foot in a council flat before this. And I think this just shows what type of people are taking care of us. You know, they're not engaging, they're not coming to the ground to actually look at what we need. And they seem to think they can just sit up there in their chairs and create policies that will, you know, fulfill our needs, which clearly it's not happening.
And they're so far removed as well. I was going to say, no, they're so far removed as well. Elizabeth Campbell is someone who has been in charge of the play service before. Now, whether she has been directly responsible for or is partly responsible for, she's definitely had a hand in the closure of some of the community services for young people that were in the area. I mean, one example of this is the Maxilla Nursery, which is admittedly in a place that's probably not ideal in terms of air pollution, but it had been in place for 40 years and the entire community wanted to keep that open, and she allowed that to close under her watch. Now, she has now been elected to be the council leader, and it has been levelled at her that she actually has a history of taking services away from the very people she has now been elected to represent and take charge for, and she's got a track record which shows she will do it the exact opposite.
So of course she's not here to represent her views on that, but I want to share with our audience an article that kind of sums up what you were saying and what Thomasina was saying. Kensington and Chelsea council leader has never been inside its high-rise flats, and there's a picture of Elizabeth Campbell defending council as inquiry lawyers are assigned and MPs prepare to debate the tower fire. I do want to share with you all one thing that has come out of that, out of this, and this headline here sums that up: corporate manslaughter charge possible in Grenfell fire. So we see that has come out of this, but this is the answer to that. This is from the name of them is the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organization. They say, we will cooperate fully with all investigation processes as we've done up until now. We're determined to continue to be as much help as we can. Pilgrim, are you convinced?
Well, no. I mean, it's, you know, they can't talk about continuing to be helpful when their entire history is of being, you know, actively obstructive and acting to the detriment and the harm of these people. And I think, you know, what we have to acknowledge is there is a huge growing inequality in that area, and you've got Conservative councillors there who predominantly went to private schools, predominantly came from a particular type of background, and like both Melvyn and Thomasina have said, there is a huge divide between these groups of people. The closest thing that Elizabeth Campbell has probably come to the residents of Grenfell Tower would have been as her cab driver or as her cleaner. So those people, you know, they've shown a complete inability to empathise and to identify with working class residents, social tenants or whatever. And I just simply don't think it's in their sort of their philosophy or in their social principles to be able to identify, to be able to value working class communities. because there is this separation. It's a very, very different culture. I have to say, I think they, you know, for a lot of the time, we were talking about how they've treated these people with disdain. And I think they have. And I think not only do they just not know them, I think they don't understand them, and they're actually afraid of them. And they want to get rid of social housing. They don't like people who live in social housing. And moreover, there is a huge amount of profit, like Melvyn said, in that land that people like them, perhaps not those individuals, possibly those individuals, people like them, their friends, their people in their social milieu will benefit from getting their hands on.
Those are big claims, Thomasina, and you're nodding your head along. What are you thinking?
Because there are like two really key issues for me here. You know, there's the fact that these people are elected and they've chosen to put themselves in that position. So they have to really take their responsibilities to, you know, seriously, and they're not doing that. So there is this sense of sort of indifference towards us. You know, an example is in the morning when the tower was still on fire at 8 a.m. we actually checked, a friend of mine checked the TMO, the Tenant Management Organization's website, which had previously had a whole big page about the fantastic regeneration that they've done on the tower. And at 8 a.m. that had been taken off. So while people were dying in that tower, instead of actually having all your resources on the ground trying to help the people that needed you at that time, they were in the offices taking down information from their website, you know, and God knows what else they were doing in that office. There's been suggestions that they were shredding paper and stuff. You know, it's just an example of why we feel that they really don't care about us. But equally, the second point I really want to keep reiterating is that as the people, we have to stand up and take this on ourselves. Part of the reason that they were able to actually behave like this was because of our lack of engagement. And I think it's time that we wake up and take our lives seriously and demand more, because ultimately we can't only blame them for not knowing what we want if we haven't actually engaged enough to let them know and insisted upon them.
So as part of that waking up, this is a headline that we've seen. Grenfell, 82 tower blocks fail new fire safety checks. I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. Fergus, what does this mean going forward for these residents?
For the residents in the other towers, right. Well, I'm sure many of them are terrified. Already there have been some evacuations in Camden in North London when there were some tenants there in some tower blocks that were very worried about it. It came out today, it came out at the end of last week that the cladding on the tower actually, it had an absolute failure in fire safety tests. And by that means it wasn't an accident of the actual installation, it was in itself inherently flammable. So I think that just gives a picture of the incredible levels of neglect that someone has not even bothered testing this cheap cladding to see if it's a potential fire risk. So
not only that, it was. No, I was just going to say, not only that, it's a product which is actually manufactured in the United States, and the United States have actually banned it for use in their own country. And I think, you know, that in itself is just completely unacceptable, to use a product banned in the country of manufacture in another country for construction.
So I want to end with these two tweets because I want to make sure I get their voices. And this is Samran. She says, those affected and the local community should always be at the heart of any decision-making process and consulted at all stages. So what that looks like in practice is actually via another tweet we got. This is a video that Grenfell Legal shared with us on why people should take part in the Grenfell Fire Terms of Reference consultation. And as we mentioned, that's open until the end of this week. Have your say on the scope of the inquiry.
Were you affected by the Grenfell Tower fire? Act before the public consultation closes on the 4th of August. The government has set up a public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire to investigate what happened and to prevent a similar tragedy. What are the terms of reference? It defines a scope of the inquiry, and the inquiry can only investigate matters covered by its terms of reference. It sets out what the inquiry is about, what events and actions need investigating, who or what organisations need investigating, and what should be changed for the future. Why participate in the Terms of Reference consultation? If the Terms of Reference are wide in scope, it means that more issues will be investigated, but a narrow scope might ignore certain questions people have asked, like how the council and the TMO's behaviour contributed, how and why the cladding came to be used, why were people's concerns about safety ignored,
Were people discriminated against?
Questions we know
Why?
you'll be wondering as well. Unfortunately, we're out of time for now. We'll end the conversation here. Thank you to our guests and our community, and until next time, we'll see you online.